just give me a heads up when you can see it.
Yeah. We can see it.
Yes.
Perfect. Cool. Okay, so welcome everyone. Hopefully this talk will be informative and you'll learn something. Just one takeaway would be all I would ask. And there'll be time at the end as well for some Q&A, as Terence mentioned at the beginning. So today you're here to kind of hear me talk about why you need to care about product thinking. It's something that I really care about, and that's why I'm giving this talk today. So the things that we're going to cover is I'm going to talk about what product thinking is. We'll be talking about the product thinking process and what that looks like, the benefits from applying product thinking to agile teams, things that I've learned through my career so far, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So why do people buy products in the beginning? So people generally buy products or use products to solve real problems that they have in their life. Product thinking helps you identify what those problems are and how your product solves them. If I think about some product fails, and I always like opening with this because I think it's really important to think about products that have gone on the market that you kind of look at and you think, who on earth would ever buy that? And the answer is they probably didn't apply product thinking. So I'm just going to run through some examples of kind of product fails that have happened over the past sort of like 30, 40 years. So the first one is the Bic for Her pen, which was launched in 2012. A customer actually gave a review of this pen, which I thought was really funny, which says, before these pens, I was nothing, but I was a mere inconsequential woman stumbling around, writing nonsense with big pens that made me look ridiculous. I could barely write my name without having to sit down afterwards. It's 9 letters long and thus really takes it out of me when writing with a normal pen designed for men. So basically this product got completely slated as being really, really sexist, and it was a complete fail in the market. The next example of a product fail was Colgate's beef lasagna. That's right, Colgate, the brand for your toothpaste, did actually launch frozen food in the 80s. It was a complete fail because they couldn't get their head around wanting to purchase food at the same time as using that for like minty breath teeth. It was also, they were trying to launch this at the same time when the frozen food section was like a really overly populated market as well. So just like really didn't go well at all. The third one, which is more recent, was the Heinz ketchup, the Easy Heinz ketchup that was launched in 2006. So it was actually quite popular when it first launched, but it quickly became something that just disappeared off the shelves. And the reason for that was because people started to become like way more health conscious. They knew that there was loads of like colors and additives in this product that they didn't really want anymore. And also it just stopped looking that appealing, as these chips probably show on the picture as well. And then finally, the next product fail, which is like probably my favorite, is Bic. So Bic, who create razors and pens, they decided to launch some disposable underwear in 1998 in Greece. As you can imagine, it didn't really go that well. The product didn't last very long on the shelves at all. People that did buy it said that it was very, very uncomfortable, but in general, there was no product market fit for this at all. People didn't have a problem where they wanted to then purchase disposable underwear. So I guess my reason for this is 42% of products, according to CBI Insights, fail. And this is based on speaking to startups and 101 different startups. But basically the main reason for why these products fail is that there's no or no user need for people's products and services. And whilst not all of you will necessarily work in a startup, I can imagine that there is a product or service that you're thinking about that you've been building internally for a client, where you've gone, everyone kind of knows it as, we don't want to be that product, or we don't want to be that project, the one that's taken years and years and has developed no value. So the point of today is to basically try and encourage us to stop having these sort of conversations with our client, where, and these are the conversations I still end up having, where it's kind of like, hey, so how do you know that what you're on track to deliver or what you've delivered been successful? Like, how do you know it's provided value for this? And the client coming back and being like, oh, well, it was achieved to time and to budget, so like my job's done. And you're like, but how do you know that it was a success? Like, how do you know it's delivered real value? And then the client just kind of looks at you like, I've already answered your question. Like, it's on time, it's to budget, like everything was fine. So for me, what I'm trying to say here is, how do we make sure we stop having these conversations with our clients and coach them in a way where they are looking at more than just the iron triangle, more than just like the cost, on time, resource allocation all being met, and thinking about it as, once it's been delivered, is it achieving real value? Is it actually successful? So how do we ensure a successful product? Well, I think the way that we achieve a successful product is by applying product thinking. So what is product thinking? So product thinking is often described as a set of processes between users, business, and technology. So it's not to be confused with design thinking. Product thinking sees the product as a whole, as a macro element, rather than just focusing on a specific feature of a product. We try to solve the problems of our customers with meaningful solutions that deliver delight and real value. Whereas in comparison, design thinking asks what features will make our product as useful as possible. Basically, like, I know loads of you would have seen this before, but it does so often get missed as well, with like the product innovation sweet spot is making sure that your product has these three things, so that it's really something that people want to use, it's desirable from your users, it's feasible, so like from a technology standpoint it can be done, and it's viable, so your business is going to make money, or it brings a business outcome that they're looking to achieve. Product thinking, as described by Naren Katakam, is said, product thinking is the journey from the problem space of the user to the solution space of the business. The goal of this journey is to reduce the gap between the users and the business. And I think this is like a really nice summary for what that's trying to say there. Product thinking is essentially, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, it's a methodology that you can apply across the whole product ecosystem when you're working through product innovation. You can think of product thinking as the process between the users, as Naren just mentioned, and the space between the problem of the users, problem space with the users, and the business solution space as well. I think what's really important to mention, and I mentioned like the macro level, but it can be applied from the top of the strategy of your whole business all the way down to the features that you put in a product. So there should be that link, that kind of like, I kind of call it a Russian doll like analogy, where from the top all the way down to the small features, there should be that thread of, we all understand what we're doing and why we're trying to do it. And we've taken that step from the problem space of what our users need, business can then provide as well. So how can you apply a product thinking mindset? So I recently attended Mind the Product with a colleague of mine. I think it was back in November now. And this analogy, I think, worked really, really well. So I wanted to walk through it with you today. So it's the waiter versus the doctor analogy. So when you go into a restaurant, a waiter will come up to you and they'll give you a menu. You have, as a hungry customer, a list of requirements that you want. And the waiter often says to you, what is it you'd like? And you reply and you tell them what it is from the menu you'd like. They go off, it gets cooked, they bring it back, and they've given you exactly what you ordered. They are an order taker. So in contrast, when you think about when you go to the doctors, even if you tell them what you think is wrong and what kind of treatment you think will work, largely they ignore you and they simply ask, what is the problem? They ask you a number of probing questions. They try and understand the problem from all the different angles. The doctor will then check data that they have on you, the healthcare data they have on you, and look at your health holistically before then making the informed decision on how to provide the right solution to your problem. A doctor is not an order taker. A doctor is there to understand the problem before offering you solutions. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you can apply product thinking, you need to think better. You try and understand the problem of your user or customer. You're then using data to make informed decisions. And just to catch out here as well, remember that like data doesn't mean you like empathize with your user, although that's really, really important. You need to at first understand what's happening with their problems so that you can evaluate what outcome they want to provide and how much effort it's going to be to get there as well. So now that you like understand, hopefully at a high level, what product thinking is, we're going to talk about the product thinking process and how it can work in practice. So for the sake of this, talk, I've put it in like a linear fashion, and I've tried to go back to the problem space versus the solution space and the aspects that sit within that process. So within the problem space, we need to understand, we need to discover, and we need to prioritize, and I'll go into these in a second, before we then move on to the solution space. So first of all, understand. What does that mean? We need to understand the user and we need to understand their problems. We need to identify the customer, the problem that they need to solve. You need to be sure that you're solving a real problem that real people need to solve. You need to uncover the jobs the product is hired to do. You need to know why you're building that product and how it's going to solve the core needs of your customer. You need to ask yourself, who are your users? What do they need or what do they want to do? What problems do they come up against trying to do that thing? Identify the desired outcomes. At the end of the day, you need a vision of what it is you want to achieve with the product and the features that will help you with that vision as well. Once you've managed to answer those 3 questions, then you should start to think about how you can turn those problems into opportunities. Or as Sun Tzu says, victory comes from finding opportunities in problems. So then we go into the discovery element. So you need to discover what opportunity exists from those user problems. Ask yourself, how might we solve this problem for our users? What impact will this solve for our users and or our business? And what happens if we don't solve this problem as well? Basically, I guess what I'm saying is, if a user has a problem, then they're really just untapped opportunities. And you can explore these by asking these questions that we've got here. So how can we do that? There is a really good tool from, back to the guy that gave the quote before, the Naren Katakam. He uses a really good tool, which I think is a good way of like uncovering some of those questions. And it's called the 5 W's and 1 H. It's a basic questioning tool that can help you understand facets of the problem. There's no particular order, but the H generally comes last because you start to think about solutions. So, for example, when you encounter a problem, your line of questioning could be, what is the problem? Who is involved? Why does this problem exist? Where does it occur? Where did it begin? How could this problem be solved? And so on. You can get creative with the questioning, especially with the hierarchy of the W's as well. An important aspect to call out from this tool is that when you're starting to think divergently or expand your problem statement and go wide, then you use the why and the what more frequently in your line of questioning. If you want to think convergently by bringing it down or narrowing down your solution options, then you start to think about the how, who, when, and where more frequently. You can use this template to reframe your users' problem statements into opportunities for you and your team to explore. And it's a really good framework on which to think creatively about how to solve a problem without proposing a solution. So once you've done that, so you've gone through, you've understood who your users are, you've understood what their problems potentially are, and done a bit more discovery on like why those problems exist, and you thought about how you can turn those problems into opportunities, you then need to think about how you narrow down your ideas. And the way to do that is through prioritization. So you need to prioritize your problems to solve. Once you have a list of potential ideas or opportunities to solve your users' problems, you need to prioritize testing. Remember, ideas and opportunities are just assumptions, and you need to make sure that you test your riskiest ones first, as they're the ones that can make or break your business model. A way to prioritize is, so coming back to that, like desirability, feasibility, and viability, I think this is a really good prioritization litmus test. I don't think it's necessarily a prioritization tool, but if you can look at it, look at your product, or look at it, what it is you're trying to achieve, and go, is it desirable? Do users actually, will what users want this? Is it solving a problem for them? Is it feasible? Like, ask your tech lead, can this actually be done? Is this something that we can make happen? And is it viable? Is it going to make most money, or is it going to solve a business need that we have, or an outcome that we're trying to drive? If yes, then you can start to think about the next prioritization tool that I've got here. This quadrant focuses on what is most and least important or valuable to your users versus how much evidence you do or don't have against your idea or your assumption. So one axis should make the biggest pains clear and prioritize what will be the most valuable and impactful to the customer. And you should do this, so like with this ruthlessly as well, against how much you do or don't know about that idea. The ideas which are most important or critical to your business model and that you have the least evidence for are the ones where you need to focus first in that top right quadrant. By doing this, the overall risk is smaller and effort won't be wasted trying to do the wrong things or trying to build the wrong products. So as you can see here, like when it's essentially like the most important, but you've got a real lack of evidence, that's the ones that you should start with, because as I say, it's the ones that are going to break your business model. Then you might think about the ones that you have a bit of evidence for, but are just like important from a customer satisfaction element. You probably won't go down where you have some evidence, but it seems to be unimportant for the user, and you'll probably most definitely never really go where it's unimportant and you have no evidence either. So now that we've like thought about the in the problem space, and we've really explored that. And you've done that through understanding your users, discovering the problems that they have and turning those opportunities, and then prioritizing them. You then get to start to think about the solutions to solve those problems. So what I was going to say is, like, how can businesses maximize on those opportunities that you've just learned in the problem space, in the solution space? And this is where I'm going to talk to you in a bit more detail about experimentation, validation, building, and optimizing. So experiments, like, that's the first thing that we want to be doing. Experiments are an important part of the product thinking process. They enable you to make sure you reduce the amount of risk surrounding your idea. We need to make sure that businesses don't view experiments as risky, and in fact, they're the complete opposite. It's a great way to quickly and cheaply test your idea, your product, your proposition, and see if it's fulfilling a user market and need. The time spent upfront could save you from months of wasted development effort, hundreds of thousands before launching a fully fledged product. If you think of it, when you launch something into live after 6 months of development, it's actually still an experiment if you haven't done any testing, if you haven't done that, like, problem-based stuff that I've just gone through already. It's just a very costly one, and one which has taken a lot of time to learn from. As humans, we're actually made to experiment. So I think people, like, often think that experimentation is something to be scared of. Like, I have a lot of people say, oh, when the client, if you say experiment, the word experiment with the client, they just, like, panic and freak out about it.
Sorry, Gemma.
Sorry, did it freeze?
You know, I was just waiting for the opportune moment to say, we can't see your slides, but it's just come back.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Did you guys see this one before?
No, we didn't see that.
Okay, well, it's nothing too wild. Basically, we're just going to go into the solution space. So we've covered the problem space, so the understand, the discover, the prioritize. And now that you've prioritized your opportunities, so you've looked at your customers' problems, you've turned those problems into opportunities, you've then decided that you've prioritized those opportunities based on the like the litmus test and the quadrant, and you've gone, cool, so now that I've got this list of stuff that I want to understand more and know whether or not it's feasible to go into, then you're moving into the solution space, which is where we talk about experiments. So that's why I'm saying, like, we start with experimentation, and now I can go back into my train of thought. So basically, like, I get a lot of clients turn around to me and go, or a lot of people go, oh God, we can't mention experimentation with the client. They'll just think it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, really risky, like, not bringing it up, not doing it. When actually, I think we need to, like, really train people to know that experimentation is a way to reduce that risk and uncertainty of your business idea. And it's a way that you test your assumptions as well. So, like I said before, like, the time spent actually could save you from months of wasted effort, £100,000 before launching that fully fledged product. So I've had lots of people go, I'm not going to experiment. Like, we're just going to launch after like a year, or we're just going to, like, put our MVP out after 6 months of development. And it's like, that actually is an experiment. You haven't actually done anything. You haven't put it into live, like, you haven't put it out into the live audience, into production. You're not seeing whether or not it resonates with your users' problems. So even though people say they hate experimentation, they often do it without realizing. It's just a very expensive, costly, heavy resourced one. I think that's what we need to try and get people to think of. As humans, like, we experiment every day, whether you think you do or not. So if you take a different route home, if you try a different hairstyle, you put on a new type of clothing, you add a bit more extra salt or pepper to your meal, that's all you running experiments. So I don't know why people find it so scary. And I think that's what we need to kind of, like, run away from. One thing that I would note is that when we say, like, make sure you test your assumptions, what we mean here is make sure you're running tests that are based on that research, data, and observations that you've learned in those problem space areas, in that discovery and prioritization. If you haven't, like, if you just want to test something that's grounded in no research, data, observations, then it's just an idea that you have, and you need to actually head straight back into that discovery phase and go through that process at the beginning. I think a lot of people kind of fall into that trap of, I've got an idea, I've heard some random people have this problem, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to start building something. And actually, you need to go back to the start and actually understand who your users are. Think about using that 5 Ws and 1 H thing, and kind of go from there. So a tool for experimentation. So I think within every experiment, you, like a scientist, you have a hypothesis And this is what makes a really good experiment. So essentially, you start with your hypotheses, and you can use this template that I've got on this page to help you frame your thinking about what it is you're testing, what your assumption is, what outcome you're expecting to see from testing, and whether or not it does actually solve a problem for your user. You can just like I've worked with a lot of mature teams who haven't necessarily needed a template like this, but instead of just written down a statement where you believe it should be true. So for example, like, we believe that millennial women prefer healthcare solutions personalized to them. And then the way that we may understand if that statement is true or not can be tested through a number of different experiments. So it's not like a one only relationship. That hypothesis that you create or assumption that you're trying to test can have a number of different experiments that branch off of it. I guess like what makes a good experiment, so I've just put some like notes here on my deck where it's something that can be shown as true or false. So there's a yes or no answer at the end of it. If not, it's not a hypothesis. The second thing is, you know what success looked like. So it describes the who, the what, and the when of your assumptions, and you understand what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve. And the third thing, it tests that one distinct and precise thing only. So yeah, it's not testing multiple things. That's different experimentations. So coming back to like my example of, we believe millennial women prefer healthcare solutions, an example of like having multiple experiments might be, I might do one where I speak to 20 women about their healthcare needs. That's maybe one experiment. The second might be to provide 20 women at the health clinic with a personalized treatment plan and see what their response is to that. That's a second experiment. And the third might be, I performed some trend analyses for women searching for personalized healthcare services and see what comes up. So it just goes to show that there's a number of different ways that you can kind of attack the same kind of experiment that you're looking to achieve. Another tool, which I think is really, really helpful for those that are starting to get into experimentation, is using the lesson learn cards that Strategize that have published, and they're really, really great. It's a template that essentially ensures that you capture everything that is required to run a really good experiment. So it has on the left-hand side in the green is essentially your like the learn side, the test side. So it gives you the hypothesis. So that template had on the previous slide, you can put in that first box. The second one, which is like to verify that the test, so you can actually describe what your experiment is. So going back to those examples, it could be speaking to 20 women in health, like about their healthcare needs, or understanding the sample data and seeing how many people are searching for personalized healthcare plans. The third one will be the measure. So how am I going to, like, what is it that I'm measuring within that? Like, is it success rate? Is it people showing that I'm hitting a need for them? Like, what does that look like? And then the fourth one is like, if we're right, so that is your success metrics, and like essentially like something quantifiable that's going to give you the answer of yes or no at the end that we spoke about before. You can then like run an experiment, and then on the right hand side you've got your learning card, which basically enables you to put down everything that you've learned and gives you a clear plan with like, what is it we're now going to do next from what it is that we've learned from this experiment, if anything. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead you to, yay, we validated what we're doing, we're just going to run on to the next thing. And we'll talk about that next. So things to bear in mind when you're experimenting is go cheap and fast early, gather more evidence through running multiple experiments against the same hypotheses, and pick the experiment that produces the strongest evidence as well. Reduce your risk and uncertainty as much as possible before you build anything through doing this experimentation. And I think as well, like just one thing to call out here is like, you will run different types of experiments based on where you are in that product thinking process. So you've got like some experiments more in the sort of like discovery phase of this solution space, where it could be, you know, like customer interviews, as I said, it could be paper prototypes, like quick sketches, be search trend analyses. But then as you become more and more confident with your solution to the problem you're trying to solve, you can start to look at more like validation experiments. And these are the ones where it provides you with strong evidence that the direction that you're moving is the right one to take. And some examples of more validation experiments include like a landing page, a click prototype, a pop-up store. It could be crowdfunding or even the MVP as well. So I just think this quote is quite nice, where it kind of like sums up why experiments are so important, as they provide you with that data that you need in order to decide whether or not your assumptions for a product idea or proposition should go any further. Or as a quote from Crowlin, your skits highlights your delusions, no matter how convincing, will wither under the harsh light of data. Essentially, you need proof through data, and you need to ensure and use your experiments to validate your ideas, and that you've got it validated. So validation is the outcome that I would expect from experimentation And validation doesn't mean like it's a yes, let's go ahead. Validation can also mean validation that an idea or an assumption is completely wrong and it's the wrong path to go down as well. When you've like, how do I know that I've reached the validation phase? So you'll know that you have a validated idea, I think, when one, your results are giving you the same outcome each time after you keep running them and running them. The second is you've run a number of experiments, from discovery experiments that I just spoke about to more validation experiments, and people are showing that they do have a real need for your product, and you've collated that data through that. And the third way that validation can exist or like provide itself is that people start actually paying for a product that doesn't exist or have signed up in some way to be one of the first when a product launches. So like a good example of that is when Monzo, the startup bank, they kind of introduced their golden ticket, and people could sign up and say that they had an interest in that they wanted to board at this like new banking startup. And they saw like quite quickly that there was a real need for their product, that they had product market fit just from people clicking on that, I want to have this exclusive thing. And that's a really good example of getting that validation before you've like fully necessarily built out your product. So once you've like had your ideas and your assumptions have been validated, then you can start to head into building and developing your product further. So even in build, as I said, like we're often still experimenting. It will just be more of those like validation experiments. So your MVP build will be one of your more costly validation experiments that you run. And this is probably how you start the development of your product before into like optimization and BAU. So you're going to learn from the feedback of real users with real problems, and then you're going to keep developing your problem from there. So the key thing with the build phase is start small. I'm probably telling most of you a lot of what everyone would agree with on this call. Start small. What is the smallest version of your idea that you can build that solves your customer problem? Start with an MVP to test your assumption. I think like the term MVP has been like so overused that people think that MVP means this like one maybe tiny feature that I'm just going to put out to market. I think it's really, I think one thing we should keep in mind is that an MVP can actually mean something that is quite a big product. If there is already a saturated market, if the customer expectation is already quite high, you're going to need to go above and beyond for that like MVP state. I recently had this with a client where they are moving from one platform to another, and the MVP of that platform was actually something that was quite chunky because it needed to fulfill the expectations that the user had already had from the previous one. And I think sometimes people just get caught up with MVP being a really tiny thing. It can just mean start with the smallest thing that you possibly can to meet the minimum expectation of your customers and the problems that you need to solve. So when you're in this kind of build stage, I think is at this point in the product thinking process that you start to apply those agile delivery practices as well. And this is where the team starts to work really well together. It's in this stage that you can utilize like agile delivery practices such as like Scrum and Kanban, which enables effective delivery of valuable products. So what I mean by that is not only do you have like real confidence that the thing that you're producing is of high value, you also now have a like really shit hot team that can go ahead and do it because you're applying those like agile delivery methods in a really slick way with a team that know what they're doing, how they're doing it, with really clear vision to go there as well. Kind of like as you kind of like build out your product, like from MVP onwards, I say that you're kind of in this like optimizations phase. So where you're continuing to use data and insights to keep your product relevant to its users in the market. This is kind of like your BAU, where you're continuously learning, continuously discovering, and continuously delivering. So yeah, I think like a lot of you would have seen this where it's like build, test, and learn. It's like what I want to talk about here is thinking about that experimentation first approach, where we experiment, we have the learnings from that experiment, we then build our product and we learn from it when it's out into a mass market again. We then experiment some more, we build, and keep going around in this dynamic as well. I think when you kind of enter this like optimization stage or BAU of your product, there's this misconception that this is like the boring stage where everything kind of like gets a bit dull and you just kind of go through your backlog of ideas. Don't get me wrong, like there'll always be maintenance items, but you should also be looking for those new growth opportunities to keep your product relevant as well. And I think one of the difficulties that product teams in this stage is the ability to balance BAU with new features as well. So one of the ways that I think is a really good model to help with the prioritization of those feature decisions is through using the Kano model. So I'm sure some of you would have seen this before, but I think is a really good approach to prioritizing features in your backlog. So Kano was as researcher and consultant, and who published a paper in 1984, came up with a set of ideas and techniques that help us determine our customer satisfaction with product features. So this model focuses on the amount of satisfaction a customer can gain from a feature, and it's dependent on the level of functionality that is provided by that feature as well. He classified the features into 4 different categories, dependent on how the customers react to the provided level of functionality. And those 4 categories are, I'm going to go through them now. The first one is performance, so that yellow line that is on this graph here. So some product features behave as we might intuitively think. So the more we provide in terms of functionality, the more satisfied our customers become. And because of this proportional relation between functionality and satisfaction, it kind of like just has this upward trend, or this like straight through the middle of the quadrant. So an example of this might be your internet connection speed, or your laptop battery life, or the storage space that you have on your Dropbox account. It's the more I have of each of those things, the greater my satisfaction is. And that's the performance ones. The second category, which is the like pink slanty line there, is the must be. So this is like customers have an expectation that this is the must be functionality that needs to exist. So they won't be satisfied if you provide this in your product, but more importantly, they're not going to be dissatisfied. So what I mean by that is, if you have this, if you don't have this functionality, they're going to be really, really like peeved. It's like me buying a phone and not being able to make a phone call. It's like the integral part of what your product needs to be, what its main function is. And the third one then is that like attractive blue slant. So these are like the delighters. Like these are the features that are going to delight your customer. They're going to help you with acquisition. They're going to help you with retention as well. They're the unexpected features that cause a positive reaction. So like for me, coming back to like my Monzo example, the very first time that I started using Monzo, an attractive feature for me was being able to freeze my bank card. Like I lose my bank card all the time. Being able to go into my phone, go onto my app, and straight away freeze my card was great. And I just like loved everything about it. I love the orange card. So it's those things that kind of give that like ooh factor for your customers. And then the fourth one that we have here is like this indifference line. So it's neither negative or positive for the customer, and it just exists. But a good watch out here is this indifference line is often where people spend a shitload of money not really seeing anything coming in from the users or business outcomes being achieved. And it's not really like not doing anything either. It's just kind of where people can plow a lot of money. So it's just something to kind of watch out for. I think the thing to bear in mind with this model is that over time, and I try to kind of like indicate this through my downwards arrow with the time, those attractive features that you might prioritize for your satisfaction functionality over time actually do kind of become must-be's or things that you expect. So with my Monzo example, like that was great like 3 years ago when I first had Monzo, being able to freeze my bank card, but now every single bank is doing that. So what I'm saying here is like those features over time that have acquired your customers or kept them retained are the things that just become an expectation. And so you need to find new ways to keep finding new attractive things to retain and acquire as well. Yeah, and another watch out as well, I'd say here is that this model, when you're plotting your kind of like features and functionality, can vary market to market. So like in the Asian market, there's often like what we'll see in the Western market as attractive or often already a must be in the Asian market. So it's just something to kind of like call out as well. But it's a really good way to prioritize what features you should be focusing in on, or like what areas you should be targeting next in your product when you're kind of in this stage of optimization or BAU. In order to like uncover the customer's perceptions towards our product, like features and attributes, Kano created this questionnaire, which is like really simple and really easy to use. So it consists of a pair of questions that we have for each feature that we want to evaluate. One of the questions is, how would you feel if you had this feature? And the other asks, how would you feel if you didn't have this feature? They're not open-ended questions. They have like very specific options, which I've labeled below. So the only answers that the consumer or the user can give is, I like it, I expect it, I'm neutral, tolerate it, I dislike it. And these answers then enable us to know where to plot the features on the model. So just like coming back to the model here, you can see that performance is like people like having it, they dislike not having it, it's equal functionality to satisfaction. The musts is I dislike not having them, and the attractive and delighters people really love having them. I could spend like a whole talk about just the Kano model, so I'm kind of going to leave it there, but I think it's like really important that you keep revisiting like how you're going to keep attracting, retaining, as well as keeping up that must-have performance aspects of your product as well. I think as well, just like making it clear that and this like optimization phase is not just about plugging through a backlog, which has had stuff sitting in there for months, or like in some cases I've seen years. It's about continuously experimenting, continuously learning and building, learning some more, and continually repeating that process and the prioritization of what you're validating to build. And this is just one toolkit that can help you to do that. So whilst the purpose of this PowerPoint, I like put the product thinking process into like a linear, of course, we know that it's not, and it looks way more like this in practice. Or as I like to put it, it looks a bit more like this, where it's not just that design thinking double diamond with the discover, define, design, deliver. It's also got that, what are the opportunities? What does the strategy look like? And then into that optimization at the end as well. And then when we think about actually like applying it in practice with the team, I think it actually looks way more like this. So like this kind of like agile try track model is a really good way of displaying how those elements of the product thinking can actually happen in parallel to one another, rather than like a linear thing. And it's really important to have the right team members at the right time throughout that process, and the right capabilities as well, to make sure that you've got a fully functioning and well-functioning product team. But yeah, the main takeaway from this is that things don't happen in linear fashion. You don't just like, you might start in the problem space, but you might quickly end up doing problem in the stuff in the problem space as well as in solution space. And that's what we're trying to say here. Like, you can do that understanding, the discovery, that prioritization, the experimentation, and the delivery can all be happening at the same time if you've got the right team in place to do that. So what are the benefits of product thinking? I put here like don't launch disposable underwear, but to come back, we basically don't want to have those product fails. That's like the main benefit of product thinking. I know I was quite harsh on BIC at the start, where I kind of went in on them with the like feminine or like sexist pen and their disposable underwear, but like it just goes to show that product thinking really does work. So after BIC had a number of product fails, they really started to put product thinking at the core of everything they did. And then they started applying like the process that I've just gone through. A lot of those attributes they started doing, so actually understanding their user base, they started discovering what problems people were having. And this is an example of a product that's done really well in the BIC market in the last couple of years, which is the gender neutral razor. So they really understood like who their customers were, what problem people were having. So like some people didn't want a pink razor just because they were a female, or like a guy didn't necessarily want a black razor because he was male. So they like took all those problems, they saw an opportunity, and they created this gender neutral razor after experimenting and testing with those people and with the problems that they had said around the original razor. I guess I know that a lot of you on the call are agile coaches. So when I was thinking about the benefits of product mindset, I think it works really, really well with like agile delivery practices, and together it's just like supersedes everything. So like product thinking, it helps you know what to build. So through taking your time in the problem space to understand your users, their problems, what opportunities there are, testing those ideas and opportunities, you go into the build knowing exactly what you need to build and why. The second thing that I think is really great, which it helps you do, which is really great for all teams that are trying to work in an agile way, is it's a really clear way of helping you to prioritize. So if you're handed a list of features and you're asked to prioritize, it's your job as the product person in the team to shift the conversation back to, well, what are the goals? Who are we doing this for? What is it helping us to achieve? What does success look like? The third thing about why I think product thinking is great is it helps keep your teams aligned. So if you know what problem you're going after, how you're going to solve it, what you need to do to deliver it, and you can communicate that to your team through like a roadmap of like a now, next, later roadmap, for example, it just like, I think just really easily helps your teams be aligned. Like everyone knows, we know why we're doing this, we know who we're doing it for, and we know whether or not it's going to be successful because we've got like these determined metrics designed for us as well. So some things that I have learned since doing product in more general are, I think these are kind of my 4 key takeaways. So the first one being just start, and I've said like in the problem space. So coming back to what I said before, experimentation really scares the shit out of people. I don't know why, because we experiment all the time. you're launching a product after a year and a half, like I said before, it's just a really expensive experiment where you're not going to know until it launches if it's a fail or not. And I think we need to move people away from that, take away the scariness. I think people often hold off for far too long of going into that problem space because they just don't want to know. They're like, I have an idea, I've got 10 friends, I've spoken to enough people, I know what it is, we're dealing with our idea. And actually you need to spend that time in the problem space really understanding who, the why, using that like 5 W's and 1 H template, really uncovering all the answers to that. And also, like, when I say just start, I mean, if you're kind of new to some of this stuff or new to this way of thinking, I think you just need to like learn by doing. So you don't get it right first time around. It's like a learning process, but it's better than running that 2-year or year and a half experiment and then realizing that it was all complete waste of time and it didn't provide you what you thought it was going to provide. Let's put it that way. The second thing that I think I'd learn is prove the value by doing or not. I've put in brackets. So I've come up against a lot of clients that are like, I just want you to just deliver this thing. I have a really clear outlined thing of what it is I want you to get done. Just go ahead and do it. And so if you're unable to kind of like coach them through why product thinking and applying this way of thinking of doing things is the right thing, just give in to the argument. It's actually easier just to give in to the argument and prove the value of not doing this stuff. So let them release that feature that hasn't been tested, that hasn't gone through that problem into solution space. Let them release that like actual fully fledged year and a half product and turn around at the end and be like, cool, so the outcomes that you were looking to get, did it give you those? Sometimes it will. It's really annoying when that happens, but 9 times out of 10 it won't. And it gives you a really good proof point to go, this is why we should start applying these things. And this is why these things are so important, because these things really obviously don't work. And this is what I was trying to say at the beginning. And just shout about the fact that it could have been averted had you had the right amount of time in the problem space into the solution space and applying this process. The third thing is, I always say, keep gathering data and not opinions. So throughout every stage of this like product thinking process, you should be thinking about metrics. I probably should have banged on about them a bit more, but how you're going to measure your impact or success, how you know that your experiments have been right or wrong, how you know that you're going after the wrong users, or the right users, how do you know that a feature that you've launched is successful even after you've done all that stuff in the problem space. So you want to move away from this like either like the hippo prioritization, like the highest paid person in the organization, or just generally this like, I think this, I think that. I recently worked for an insurance company who I'm not going to name, and this is all they did. All they did was prioritize and argue on opinion. And the moment we shifted to that data, the moment we shifted brief points throughout the product thinking process, it just removed all emotion from the conversation. And it meant that those conversations that we were having for like an hour and a half just turned into 10-minute discussions, because it was like, this is the data. Like, we're going to go off the data, be the doctor. And I think just keep thinking of that, like in your head, like be a doctor, don't be an order taker. Like, look at the problem, you take the data, then come up with a solution from that. So every time, like, I just think that's like super important. I just like cracking up to myself because I just think this happens so much in my day-to-day. But anyway, every time like I run an experiment or get feedback from users, see data coming into my product, I try and use that as much as possible for making decisions around my product, even if it's for the next time, if the client doesn't want to buy into the first time. Think of the data as your evidence. Don't rely on those opinions from yourself as well, as much as others. They're really just assumptions, and they are the killer of you having a product thinking mindset. And then the fourth thing in terms of my like key learning that I've taken away is, don't get caught in the build trap. So where success is measured on outputs, not outcomes. Encourage yourself and your team to think more like that doctor. So try not to just take on like requirements or features that keep coming into the team. Really push back for the answers of, who is this for? Why are we doing it? What problem did it solve? What confidence do we actually have that it's going to give the expected outcome that you're looking for? How are we going to measure its success? If the client or whoever you're working for really struggles to answer any of those questions, then you have the right to ask them to figure out before the team just pull it into their backlog or pull it into their prioritization. And remember to like always value outcomes over outputs, not the other way around, because that's going to be the thing that kind of kills your product. So, or as Melissa Perry like kind of nicely says about the build trap. So the build trap is when organizations become stuck measuring their success by outputs rather than outcomes. It's when they focus more on shipping and developing features rather than the actual value that those things produce. And I think this is like really key, is to like constantly ask them for those outcomes that they're looking for, rather than just the outputs of getting something delivered on time to budget with the right team in place. So if there's one like key takeaway I'd say, is just make sure your teams are delivering something useful, not just faster as well. So apply that product thinking mindset along with that agile delivery, the two things together. And I think that you'll absolutely ace it, and you'll have something that's amazing in the market, or even if it's an internal product internally as well, it will do really well. And that's like kind of it for me. So I guess I'm open now to Q&A if people wanted to ask any questions at all. And my totally catfish picture, which I'm going to put up as well, just in case anyone wanted to chat after on LinkedIn.
Oh.
Thank you, Emma. That's a lovely talk.
Yeah. If people got questions, I can either put them in the chat or just ask away. I'll start the questions. So, you mentioned there about winning people over. What would you say is the common resistance you get to taking this approach?
I think there's a real misconception that it's going to be costly and take loads of time and take the resource or the people away from doing the right thing, which is just delivering it. Like, that's often what I get back, or I get the whole like, we've done this, like we've done a discovery, because I think people have different interpretation of what discovery is now. The terms like become really overloaded in the market, and as soon as you start to scratch the surface of like what discovery means sometimes for clients, not all clients, some clients are great at it, but like with some of the clients or people that you work for, you're like, actually this is just because it's gone to a board meeting and they've got a business proposal and the business case is being signed off. That's not discovery. So that's been my main resistance, has been, it's going to cost me loads of time, it's going to cost me loads of money, and it's time we don't have, because they're often backpedaling on up against a ridiculous time pressure to get something done. I think, yeah, my thing back to them is often, cool, like we can totally just go ahead and just build the thing, but if you can validate your idea now or what it is you're trying to do now, the validation might be that it's actually the complete wrong thing, or you're focusing on the wrong stuff, and that in itself can save you time and money and effort. But it's a really difficult conversation to have with a client. I guess it comes back to my point of, I have often had to just bite my tongue. Like, you can have the argument a few times and then just be like, cool, we'll do it your way, we'll keep delivering, until I can until there's a proof point for me to go, this didn't work, and if we'd have done it this way, let's try it, let's just experiment by doing it this way, and if that works better, we'll go with it, and if not, then we'll revert back to your way. Yeah, that's typically what's happened.
Thank you. Cormac's put a question in, which is, I'm working with a product team, we're building an internal app. Do you see any challenges or opportunities with product thinking in this scenario? So
it's really interesting. I was having a conversation with my partner about last night. So everyone thinks, I think people think about product thinking, they think it's for external products only, because often the examples, just as much as mine were, are like, you know, Colgate's, or like they're looking at things that an external customer is going to go and buy. But product thinking can be applied to internal just as much. So the questions are all the same, and you should still need answers to them all. So who am I doing this for? Well, I'm doing it for someone internal. It might be my HR team, because like, I don't know, they have a specific problem, or it could be like all of my team, they have a specific problem that you're trying to solve for them. So in some ways, I think people go, oh, it's an internal product, like, let's just not care, let's just whiz it through, let's get it delivered. But I think like there's been a number of times where I have definitely been the recipient on the receiving end of a product that has been designed for an internally designed product, and it has been crap. So I might have had a problem. It's not that problem. It's actually caused me more headache because they haven't done this process. They haven't gone through product thinking and thought about how to like make the best of an internal product. So for me, like, I guess the hardest thing is people go, oh, but it's an internal thing. So coming back to your opportunities and constraints, they go, internal thing, like we know everyone here, like it's fine, we'll just go ahead and do it. But actually sometimes that can be a real a blind spot of actually sometimes you need to delve in even more when it's an internal thing to make sure you really do understand the problems and the thing, because you're actually going to be on the receiving end way quicker if it's an internal product, if it's crap, and if it's the problem for that user. So yeah, I think there's like endless opportunity for you to do this internally. It's just as important for internal products as external. I hope that's answered your question, but like let me know if it hasn't as well.
Yeah, I'm sure Cormac can put something in the chat. Has anybody else got a question?
Yeah, quick question about it. With the data gathering, what way would you avoid using your own bias on the data? Because with all data, biases have a large effect on any data you gather, because you will focus on often trying to confirm your own biases instead of actually using the data properly.
Yeah, so I guess that comes back to me when you're about your experimentation and you're thinking about how it is you're going to experiment, and you're looking at what that success criteria looks like. It's being really honest with yourself about what it is you're looking for. So experiments shouldn't be there to just like feed into that bias of like, this is the right thing to do. It should usually need to be like really, really clear with like what success metrics look like, what data it is that you're gathering, and like whether or not that kind of like yes or no is actually like fully ticked, so that you don't just like feed into your bias. There's like a number of points throughout the whole process as well, where I think when you're in that optimization, so you're out of experimentation and the data kind of like that's you're thinking about there, when you go into that like optimization space, it's really easy to like have a dashboard up and go, oh, like this is great, like the users are doing this. I think you still need to go back in and understand what that data is actually means. You need to carry on with that kind of like understanding your users and how they're using your product, because sometimes the data isn't like the statistic isn't the only thing that you need to be pointing at. You need like the balance of like qualitative and quantitative as well. But for me, like it comes back to like experimentation. In my talk, you'll probably remember I spoke about those like more discovery type experiments versus the more like validation type experiments. When you're thinking about data for each of them, it's just being really clear on what type of experiment you're going to run and what type of data it is that you want to get out of those, and that should like help you to not like include that like personal bias that you have. Yeah, that's like my main advice for that. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I do agree with the early experimentation is extremely important. I've seen it in a lot of different industries that it's so often ignored.
Yeah, it is, but it's not like it is ignored, but it's also not ignored, because as I say, they are often experimenting without realizing, because they just launched something after a year and a half and it's their biggest, most costly experiment that will do.
Yes, but at that point I don't think it's an early experiment anymore, because they invested a lot of money and resources into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's their validation, the biggest validation experiment that we're looking at, for sure.
Yeah. Hi, Emma. This is Santosh. I'm calling from India. And one example or one experience I would like to share. So all the validation that goes into building a product or the service that you want to create. So I was building a innovation management, that is idea management portal for companies. Okay, and the all the necessary validation, the requirement, engagement with people who are going to use your product, everything was done.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody was excited to use the product, to share what features they would like to have in the product, right? Like the rewards, they wanted to see the reward section there. They wanted to see the points that people would gather, right? So everything was fair. But actually, when we demoed the product to the companies, to the decision makers, right? there were people who were supportive of having the product. However, the finance person, refused, saying that we do not have budget for innovation. So this is very tricky actually, meaning along with the points that you mentioned, right? That we need to do validation, we need to gather data. At the same time, there is one very important point that for the person whom you are building the product, you should ask one question, that if I'm building this product for you, would you be ready to pay me upfront for building this product? It may not be a complete 100% payment or something like that, but maybe a token. So do you think that would make sense if you are building something?
I guess it's difficult. So you can use that kind of like Kano questionnaire that I kind of pulled up to see, like try and get some stats around how some of your features in your product resonate with them and like what the functionality gives. I think the data, so from what I just want to make sure that I've got this right in terms of the problem that you're describing, is that the financial person in charge of the budget was basically like, yeah, it doesn't matter if everyone said that this is a great thing to do and it's needed, I'm not going to give you the money to go ahead and deliver it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think come back to like some of those like questions that we had in that Kano model, which is like, cool, so what is the risk of not doing this product? So, and that risk can be, what is the risk to your user base? So if it was an internal product, I think you mentioned it was internal product, is it the risk that they're going to leave their job? Is it the risk that their day-to-day job is going to be 10 times slower? Like you can put a cost on people's time. So like you can start a business case of like the problem that it solves, that it's taking away, or that the job that it's helping your audience to do, you can normally put a number on that, and that becomes part of your business case. So like when you're creating your product, and I think I haven't used this as one of the templates that I've spoken about, but you can use the lean canvas template, and that basically has a whole section in there around like what is your business model. So what it talks about your users, it talks about the problems that they're having, it talks about the way that they're solving those problems today, and you can start to unpick that and come up with a bit of a business case as why it is worth developing your product. And that might be, it's not just monetary, by the way, so it can be like reputational risk, so damage to the reputation of the organization, which you could argue comes back to a monetary value eventually. It could be like the loss of people that have like decided to leave an organization, or the amount of time that people are losing on their day, and you can start to equate that back to like recruitment fees, or the amount of time that's being wasted. You can equate that back based on a salary average. So there's always ways that you can do it and have those conversations with those finance people. I think that like business model piece is one of the most important pieces, and it comes back to when I spoke about it being desirable for the users and feasible from the technical thing. I guess the other bit that you needed to double check was that business viability, and having that conversation with, is it going to make money, or is it going to bring something back for a business outcome? If the answer is no, then it would have failed at that point as well.
Agree.
That helps.
Yeah, thanks.
Got a question in the chat as well from Amy. I'm working with a team who are working on an internal delivery to meet a security requirement. Have you got any advice on how I could bring them back to product thinking? It's interesting that you said about the security requirement specifically. I'd love to hear from you whether or not your problem is that people are just going, we just need to get it done because it's a security thing that needs to happen. Is that what's, I know that you put it on the chat, but if you can just like help me out with that, is that what's happening, or? 100% that.
Cool. Yeah. So unfortunately, from a compliance, so I worked at a banking startup called Crew. I had this quite a lot where I was like, let's think about all these amazing ideas and like things that we can get to get the product off the ground and be better than Monzo. And they were like, yeah, Gemma, there's all this shit that we have to do to be compliant and we need to do from a security standpoint. So I completely sympathize with you. I think it's about having that balance. So when you've got your backlog of stuff that you need to get done. If you've got a security deadline that you need to get done, unfortunately that does need to take precedent, because without it you're not going to be compliant. Financial services too, because you're not going to be compliant, and then therefore your product has no grounding. It's not going to go anywhere anyway. It's about having that balance in your team. So I'd say, like, I had a development team that were like, why do we just keep doing this boring stuff? Like, I'm just creating rules and like compliance stuff, and it's just so dull. So I think just making sure that with your development team, you have a really nice balance of like 80-20, where it's like 80% is to meet security requirements or whatever it is you need to get done by a deadline, but give them that 20% where you're looking at those kind of like those attractive, if you think about that K9 model, those like attractive features that are exciting to think about. And I think that keeps your team like grounded. Often can actually motivate them as well to want to get the security stuff done quicker, because they want to be back focusing on more of that fun stuff. It really, really sympathize with you. It's really shit when you have to, like, there's just some stuff that you have to do and it is just dull. So in terms of product thinking, when you're thinking about that business viability, that's where that stuff sits, unfortunately, and it just needs to get done alongside the other stuff. No worries. Are there any other questions too?
Have you, this is just from my own personal interest, do you know of any products which have not matched that Kano model, but have seemed to be successful in the marketplace anyway?
Yeah, I think, that the K9 model is just something that I personally love. I don't think that lots of people do that. I think often you'll see with product teams that they have like the BAU optimization or like fixing stuff teams. And then they'll have like the growth team, and the growth team are going out looking at those new opportunities and ways to kind of bring new ideas to market. And that's often how they split it, but it doesn't have to be. The K9 model is just like, I think, a good way of helping you with that prioritization thing and thinking about having a good balance between things that are going to grow, and so like the acquisition and retention of your customers, as well as having the stuff that's going to keep the existing ones there and just becomes an expectation as well. But yeah, there's loads. I think they all, like, lots of examples. Like, obviously I've spoken about Monzo loads. Slack's a really good example as well. Yeah, there's loads of good stuff out there.
Okay, thank you. Right, I would just ask. Oh,
I've gone on to an extra slide. Sorry,
an extra slide.
A little. It's not an Easter egg. Don't worry. It was just. But yeah.
Okay, I'd like to ask everyone to come off of mute, if possible. I can see people coming off mute. And just to give Gemma a round of applause and to thank for a very interesting talk.
Thank you very much.
Obviously, you could do the icons as well. I forgot about the icons.
Yeah, and if people were a bit too nervous to talk on the call as well, then feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm happy to chat.
While people are still off mute, also a round of applause to Prem. Unfortunately, Rohit had to leave earlier as well, but for the book review, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Prem. And I'll also say thank you to Terence. You did a great job as well.
It's very kind of you. I haven't
Thank
done
you.
anything.
What are you talking about? You've done a lot of things.
Right, I will go to